So, are you familiar with the term elevator pitch? This is where the AAA technique comes in.
What is today's advice?
Well, today I have a few topics to cover. The main theme is introductions and small talk. We'll talk about introducing yourself with something I call the elevator pitch introduction. Then we'll also get into how to continue conversations with something called the AAA or AAA technique. And finally, we'll talk about some acceptable topics and topics to avoid when having small talk.
Thank you very much. Yes, as I'm not native English speaker, I sometimes hesitate to talk, especially at the beginning. So it's going to be really helpful if we can learn about this technique and tips.
Yes, I think all of this information will be very useful. So, are you familiar with the term elevator pitch?
I have heard, but I don't know much about that.
Okay, the idea behind an elevator pitch is the concept that you're meeting someone who's very high up and very important in the company that maybe normally you wouldn't have the chance to meet. And you happen to be on the elevator with them just by chance. So you take the opportunity, as long as they are stuck on the elevator with you, to travel between floors to share an idea. So we hear about it for sales ideas or for new concepts. So you give the most important information in a very short amount of time, maybe 30 seconds or less. So that's where the idea of the elevator pitch comes from. So an elevator pitch introduction is the same idea, giving an introduction of yourself in a short amount of time, focusing on the most important information. The things that you should include in this elevator pitch introduction are your name and your job title or position, your company, a current project you're working on, and what's exciting about the project. If you can include all of that information, that's a good way to introduce yourself and lead into other possible conversations. Let me give an example myself. Nice to meet you. I'm John McGraw. I'm a business English coach for Japanese professionals, and I run my own business. I'm currently working with Talisman Corporation to create videos about business English, which is really exciting because they're going to show Japanese professionals how they can use business English to get real results in global companies. So the strength of that is, of course, I'm especially talking about the project, because then that leads into maybe more questions from the other person. Oh, that sounds really exciting. So can you tell me more about that, or tell me more about the videos? So if you can include that, it's more than just talking about your name and your title. It's something that can really start a conversation.
Yeah, I think so.
Now, one thing that I think we've talked about before in another video is about silence and how that sometimes comes up in conversations. As we've mentioned before, sometimes in Japan, in business particularly, if you need some time to think, or if you're communicating in English and not so comfortable with English, silence will happen. There will be periods of not talking. Now, in some countries, particularly Canada and the United States, long periods of silence can be considered uncomfortable. Many Canadians or Americans in particular, they might try to fill in the silence with small talk because, it's a bad atmosphere. I need to talk more and add more. So sometimes if you're used to long periods of silence, or you're waiting to give the other person a turn to speak, you might not get it. And this can also happen if you only give answers to questions. Sometimes like, oh, what do you do? I'm a managing director. Where do you work? I work at Talisman. where it's more like an interview or an interrogation. If you give all these short answers, well, people will be less interested in talking to you. And of course, if you need to network, you want people to talk to you and you want to seem like a very good conversationalist. So this is where the AAA technique comes in. And it's called AAA because it explains how you should answer questions in a conversation. The first A is, of course, to answer the question. The second A is to add more information. And the third A is to ask a related question. So answer, add, ask. And if you do these things, this really helps to keep the conversation going and makes the flow very nice.
Oh, interesting. Answer, add, ask.
Exactly. I'll give you an example without the AAA technique and then an example with the AAA technique. So, of course, as we all know, a common question might be, what do you do? So a very common response might be just to answer it. Oh, I'm a developer at Microsoft, which is fine. But if that's all you say, it's uncomfortable because the other person has to keep asking questions. It's better if both of you are asking questions. So a better way to do it is with the AAA technique. Answer, I'm a developer at Microsoft. Add more information. I'm in charge of Azure Cloud development. And ask the question, have you heard of Azure Cloud? Then you get to think of the conversation as like a tennis game. And the question is when you serve the ball back and forth. And if both people are doing this, it makes the conversation go much more nicely. And you have to remember at least one thing, try to finish with a question.
I see. So it will not make silence.
Exactly. So I think that brings us to the final part about acceptable topics and topics you should be careful about and topics to generally avoid when getting into small talk.